Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast.
What is good, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall. I'm with my guys, Roa and Todd, to talk about Miami, the race that we all love to hate and maybe potentially hate to love at this point. I don't know. I mean, got some mixed emotions around this track, around this race. But before we get into that, how are you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing great. I was just going to say the party was not in the city where the heat is on. It was a lukewarm race, and our takes are the only thing scorching about this entire weekend, but I digress. I don't know. It just kind of felt like, you guys ever been to a party and it's the world's best pizza and the world's best meatball subs, but there are no napkins? Because that's what that felt like today.
That is some inside baseball. No one else is going to get that.
That's
but
fine.
yeah,
One for them, one for us.
Yep.
Reminds me of the congratulations you did it in Elf, world's best cup of coffee.
I mean, we're going to get into it, but yeah, mixed emotions is right. More inside baseball. This is our second attempt at recording this episode due to some technology issues last night. And yeah, I think I'm glad we had another day to absorb because we got some more info on the race and whatnot. But really good attempt, maybe bad execution. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, just summarize. But it's will and shall forever remain to be the white trash Monaco.
Which is,
at least it's the placeholder until Vegas next year.
That's true.
I mean, yeah, we'll get into that. I mean, it's really the perfect place for, pretzels that leave you thirsty. Wishing
the competition in this race left me thirsty. It was just like, we got 7 good laps in the beginning. And then we had a 5-lap foreplay, if you will, of Charles trying to get it, but the brass ring kept eluding him. And this, as Martin Brundle put it, is the new Verstappen 2.0. He's, a tender-hearted young man, but the wisdom of an old sage. If this is the case, it's just a question of, can he make up the fact that he didn't finish in 2 races and got 0 points? Because if he hadn't done that, if he had even scored points, I think this is a runway already.
Yeah, I'm staggered at the fact that he's won every race he's finished so far. And if he didn't have I don't think he would have won the 2 races that he didn't finish, but how much closer would he be in the championship if he had finished those 2 races in P2? Like, we'd have a neck and neck championship. This has been a great season so far, don't get me wrong, but I think this felt, again, like we talked about on the last podcast, is Red Bull finding that second gear, that next level, because it felt like no matter what Ferrari did this weekend, that they were just a step behind.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, we'll get into that, but we do have a short and sweet review to read, right?
We do have a short and sweet review to read, as it takes my laptop a little bit to load the said review. I will say this, AJ3 back in the day, thank you for yet another 5-star review. Good show for new fans of Formula One. Formula One is a complicated sport, but this show helps me understand it. And because you didn't specify a goofy phrase, we're going to utilize that as a goofy phrase. So if at any point there's something bewildering me or my co-host, it's straight Rasheed Wallace time. It was a good game. Both teams played hard, and Formula One is a complicated sport, and this show helps us understand it. So that will be my verbal crutch for this particular show. So thank you, AJ3 back in the day. To all of our listeners who still haven't written a review, get off your asses, give me a funny phrase to incorporate. Otherwise, we're going inside baseball, because I need reviews. They quench my thirst, unlike pretzels. And the other thing I need are napkins, because we give you pizza content, but nothing to clean it up with. So that's my PSA for the day. Todd, where are we?
I think it's race rundown time. Nick with the finishing order.
Let's do it. All right. So Max Verstappen with Red Bull finished first. Charles Leclerc with Ferrari finished second. Carlos Sainz with Ferrari finished third. Sergio Perez with Red Bull finished fourth. George Russell with the Mercedes in fifth. Lewis Hamilton in sixth. Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo In 7th, Esteban Ocon in the Alpine. In 8th, Alexander Albon. In 9th with the Williams, Lance Stroll. Last in the points in the Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso, 11th. Yuki Tsunoda, 12th. Daniel Ricciardo, 13th. Nicholas Latifi, 14th. Mick Schumacher, 15th. And Kevin Magnussen, Sebastian Vettel, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, and Zhou Guanyu all did not finish. So, as stated, we did this last night. Before we get into the topic that I know we're going to get to with the Red Bull AlphaTauri conversation, I was looking at this last night. Like, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes are not that far off. Like, yes, they are not number 1 and number 2 like they were last year, but they are. The way they talk is if like they're the new Haas, and like they're still like comfortably competitive in that 3rd spot. Spot. I mean,
I disagree.
Talk to it.
I think
how
at best, right? Okay. To your point, right? They have somehow they're magically like I don't know, anywhere from the 6th to 7th slowest car in qualifying. Generally, it feels like. I can't give you numbers to back that up, but that's what it feels like to me. And then the race pace that comes alive a little bit, where they're, 5th, 4th, maybe, swinging for the 3rd fastest car on race pace. Kind of. I think this was a really interesting weekend for Mercedes because free practice 1, which we'll get into the fantasy later, free practice 1 made me swing for the fences, and I was like, damn, George looks real good here.
George is getting excited.
Yeah.
But like they looked really good on Friday on free practice 1 and 2. And then whatever they did for free practice 3, I think they changed their setup a little bit and lowered the ride height, which brought the porpoising back real bad. So then for qualifying, they changed it back to whatever it was on Friday. And somehow the evolution of the track with the grip, ramping up over the weekend, it just didn't work for the same way it was on Friday. It wasn't the good car. But back to your point or your question, they've been fortuitous in almost every race they've had a good result this weekend, right? Like the first race when they were running in 6th and 7th, and then they had all the DNFs, and then that gave them, what was it, 3 and 4, I think?
I believe that was the case.
Yeah,
Lewis got a podium, and then George got right behind him, right? And then trying to remember the other races now, but overall, I think, without getting in too much into the weeds, overall, I think they've been lucky getting into the spots that they've gotten into, which happened kind of again because they were out of position up until that safety car hit. They were like ahead of where they probably should have been in the pecking order, and then the safety car hit and it gave them kind of a breather to stay where they were.
It's just hard for me to think that they're less than so if they are considered the 3rd team on the grid performance wise, that puts them at 5 and 6, right? Lewis has finished 3rd, 10th, 4th, 13th, and 6th. George has finished 4th, 5th, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So they're right on to where we expect them almost, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, one man may call it fortuitous. I just consider that muscle memory and just being a professional race car driving. Mercedes hasn't beaten itself yet, would be my observation. Everybody else is tripping in spite of themselves over the rakes that are all over the yard, and Lewis and George are kind of sidestepping on it. Now, I will say this. George is boat racing him right now. Safe to say, because there's still something off about Lewis, which is something we're all not used to. That being said, I thought this would be the race where he would kind of have some sort of momentum to come back, because as we were all seeing in the pre-race interviews, everybody was kind of pulling for Lewis. I think America, if we had to pick a driver that's our country's famous, and we do love a good front running, it would be Lewis Hamilton. But I don't know, like, this is going to be interesting to me because wasn't there a moment in the race at some point where Lewis kind of was bemoaning the fact that, hey, the strategy is not working for me? And was that a pot shot at George, or am I misinterpreting that?
Yeah, I don't think it was a pot shot at George necessarily. I just think it was when they chose to pit them on the first stint, and then when the safety car happens, if Lewis did decide to pit for another set of tires, he would have dropped a position to George. Granted, he would have probably been on new softs, so he would have had the chance to battle back. But then again, it's teammate against teammate, and right now Mercedes is just scrambling for points, whatever they can do. So he was just saying, like, you know, I don't know, being kind of typical, a bit typical whiny Lewis, which he, when things don't go his way.
To do. Like,
yeah.
Go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think one thing that came up in another conversation after the race was what's his name from Ferrari, the team principal for
Matteo Binotto.
Basically said like he's happy to be disappointed because they didn't win, right? Yep. And I feel like that kind of mentality is like the exact opposite of Mercedes, right? Like Mercedes expects to be 1-2 always, right? Like for the past, I mean, they have been roughly for the past 10 years, pretty damn close to it. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because if McLaren was performing and finishing the same way that Mercedes is, Todd and I would be stoked each week, because we'd be like, well, shit, they got, you know, they're easily third, you know, in the constructors. But that's kind of an interesting way to look at it too. And also to give credit to Ferrari, right? To have graduated to where being second and third is disappointing. You have to, it takes a lot to get to that point, right?
No, it does. And Ferrari is back in all ways that we think every year. Texas football is back. The New York Knicks are back. In fact, any New York franchise is back the minute they show any sort of competency. And Ferrari's finally overcome that mountain. I'll use this opportunity to kind of ask my newbie question of the week. Branding. Here we go. If you were Matteo Binotto, would you rather have Charles Leclerc win the Drivers' Championship, or would you rather win the Constructors' belt?
That's a really deep question that we could probably delve into at a later time. It's strange that sport has two championships. It's like it's like the you know, a team winning the Stanley Cup and or that's, no one cares about hockey except for me. Let's talk about
the Hart Trophy, maybe.
Well, like okay, football. Everyone likes football, like the Lombardi and the MVP. Right. So like it's almost like the MVP being as important as the Lombardi Trophy. And this is the only sport that I can think of, at least, that has that. To me, though, the Drivers' Championship is still just ever bit so more important. And I think even the teams think if we'd rather have one or the other, well, the accountants of the team definitely want to have the constructors, right? Because there's a wild swing between, like, I mean, we're talking tens of millions of dollars difference in the placement. So they'd much rather have the constructors. But I think the racers of the team, the engineers, the pit crew, the whatever, like, and the drivers obviously being the most important pieces of that team, or the faces of the team, whatever you want to call it, they'd rather have the driver's title. I think the team principal also kind of wants to live vicariously through the driver in that aspect and have the driver's title. I could be wrong, but like, no, the only reason we're talking about Mercedes in this way right now is because they've won 8 constructors in a row. And before that, it was Red Bull with 4 in a row. But if it was Haas and then Alpine and then Aston and then Mercedes and then Ferrari and then Red Bull, no one would talk about the constructors nearly as much as we do, because we've only had, for the last 20 years, essentially, periods of dominance. Yeah. Like, it was Mercedes, before that was Red Bull, before that was, well, Alpine had 2, but then Ferrari, or not Alpine, Renault whatever. Well, Renault didn't even have two. They had one. And Alonso was on a different team for the second one. But anyway, the only reason we talk about it in the same light is because we have these eras of dominance between teams. So I waxed way too long on that than I thought of. But what do you guys think?
I mean, I kind of lean towards the team principal wanting the team to win. I would bet that there's more money in their pockets bonus wise if the team wins a constructors championship than there would be for a driver title. That said, I think it's a flip of the coin, right? Like it's the beauty of the sport as a fan, in my opinion, that you can root for an individual or you can root for a team, and both of those can win, right? I can't root for, this is an admittal that I don't necessarily want to throw out there to the world, but like I'm a big Clayton Kershaw fan. He plays for the Dodgers. Like I want to see him succeed, except for when he's playing against the Giants.
Sacre bleu.
But that's an interesting thing that you just can't have in any other sport besides racing. And, because in theory, yes, maybe in baseball you could have an MVP award and, a team could win the title. But in racing, it's so much more, you're really about, you're really invested for the whole season, right? It's not like, cool, like, I want LeBron to win a scoring title again, but I don't want the Lakers to win a championship. Like, that's just a weird, like, it just doesn't feel right in other sports, I guess is the best way to put it. So that said, I think like for fans, especially new people to the sport, like be a fan of the people, be a fan of who you like. Like I'm absolutely a Haas fan because of, Gunther, right? Like he is absolutely entertaining. Like I want to hang out and have beers with that guy, even though I rarely have beers ever anymore. But like that would be something that would just be amazing because, he would just go off on something random and you'd just be totally entertained for an hour or two.
No, I think if Gunter is listening, please smash the like button and subscribe if you can, Gunter, because Nick Engvall needs the companionship. He's been going through it a couple of weeks now, and nothing would bring joy to this man's face like a tasteful cameo. No, it's funny you mentioned the MVP thing because it's this award that as American sports fans, we kind of have this weird backlash towards because, for every MVP that has won that award, he's probably also not won the title. Dirk Nowitzki, LeBron James in a couple of years. And it's kind of got this gift and the curse associated with it. I think as a relatively new fan, especially compared to my two peers here, I would think you would want the title because of constructor, because of the fact that it is a team effort. And I think team principals above all else have to be parents. And while you may have a favorite in your mind, you can't show that favoritism unless somebody is continually delivering the results the way Lewis had, let's say, because ultimately that is a yard mark. That is a reference point we've had over the last decade in terms of just overall dominance. There's a reason why Bottas is now having this career revival at Alfa Romeo because of the fact that he no longer is looming in Lewis's shadow because he was damned if you do, damned if you don't. It was essentially a Pierre Gasly type of situation. There's your segue, Nick. But it didn't have the publicity of the Drive to Survive with it like we saw in season 2.
Well, and it's subjective for MVPs in every other league, right? Somebody votes on it. So there's emotion involved. Some depending on the sport, right? Like it's a press person, it's, league people, but like numbers, right? Like numbers is what Formula One is all about. So like a driver goes out and wins a title, it's purely based on numbers with the exception of last season, which might be,
I was just going to say, like, don't you think the voting was voting of one by Michael Massey last season and just, no.
It's not right, Michael.
I don't know
it's
if
not
we want
right,
to open that wound again.
No, Michael, this is not right. Okay, yeah, we could probably go back and forth on that. The last thing I would say is we're blessed in being fans of this sport and hosts of this podcast because no matter what, even if Ferrari was running away with the drivers, say Charles had won the first 6 or something, it's still interesting because like we just said, like it really matters who gets 6th and 7th in the championship. And that even more so comes into account now with the sliding scale and the cost cap era because you know, Mercedes right now is the most limited team on all of their CFD and wind tunnel time, and that'll reset halfway through the season. So if they're in P3 or P6 or God willing above P5, thanks to our bet, that's going to start to make a difference. So it will be interesting no matter who's in front in the drivers. The constructors will always be interesting, and vice versa.
And remind people of that bet, and just in case they forgot.
I believe it was a pack of Red Bull that I'm taking the over on. Or you took 4 down, right? So the over under is 4.5
Right.
Of Mercedes finishing 4.5 or higher
At the end of the constructors.
In the constructors championship. And if they keep sneaking in and getting lucky, I'm looking like I'm going to be sending you a pack of Red Bull, but we'll see. Oh wait, I guess it could be Monster since they're sponsored by Monster.
You know what? I would only like Rich Energy, please.
I've looked to buy that. I know we're getting off into tangent here, but I've looked to buy that in the US so many times because I just want to have a can here for like a, collection memorabilia thing. And I found one on eBay and somebody wanted like $120 for a pack of it. And I was like, no, I'm not spending that on an energy drink I'll never drink. So
Rich Energy, Haas, when we finally start the video portion or the video version of the podcast, I've got a treat for you guys. But it's only coming out when we start launching videos. So,
man, I got to lose a couple more pounds now for you as well, Nick.
I was actually looking for something today online to spice up my background for future video podcasts.
Yeah. All right, so back to Red Bull. I believe the bet kind of transitioned into like a Capri Sun kids drink or something, didn't it?
It was a adult beverage or a child beverage, depending on who won.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'll take the child beverage. I don't drink either. So Capri Suns for me.
Yeah, Capri Sun for Todd and his son. I like it.
So Red Bull, Max Verstappen, basically, I don't know. Is he untouchable at this point? It seems like Red Bull's faster on the straights. They're slightly faster even through the curves this weekend. Maybe that's just track problems, but generally speaking, like they are just kicking ass and taking names. And I just don't know if, I don't know. Like I feel like Rohit said, this might just be a runaway here in the next few races.
They've done what every older sibling has been forced to do or is anxious to do, which is just say, let's play a game of 1-1. We'll go to 7. I'll spot you 6. And then they'll just run 7 points off. And they look dominant. The only way I could see Red Bull getting in their own way, aside from a Julie curse, shout outs to Julie. Hopefully the move is good, Julie. And now you can start cursing Max Verstappen again, if for no other reason to bring more joy into Todd's life, is if they have those power engine issues, because we kind of saw that happen to Checo. Like he was supposed to essentially help Max out, but he couldn't get past Carlos because of the fact that it wasn't due to his driver's ability, because I think right now he probably is the better driver on form alone. But because of the fact that his car is inconsistent, he couldn't get there. And I think that's what's saving Ferrari is the fact that Red Bull still hasn't figured out the energy component of it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. This is again talking about fantasy, but due to Friday, watching free practice on Friday and all of the reliability issues, I was like, oof, this feels like, I know Julie hadn't said anything about Max DNFing, and that was early in the weekend, and she just does it during the race to hurt my fantasy team. But they looked real bad to start the weekend. They looked off. Max lost a bunch of track time getting the laps in on a brand new track. So I was like, oh wow, maybe Ferrari's going to take this one because they looked really good. They looked good in the mid speed corners. And then we know that Red Bull has the better power unit, so they're just a bit faster. And I think it was something like 7 miles an hour faster down the straights without DRS.
I was going to say that's DRS without DRS. So add the DRS, you've got 14 miles?
I didn't do the conversion, but I was watching a Peter Windsor video earlier today, and with DRS, it was like 18 kilometers an hour. So whatever that works out to in miles per hour with the DRS, and he still couldn't catch him, which is crazy. But I think the one thing, the real decider for me, at least in this race, was Ferrari does a better job of firing their tires up immediately, or getting their tires into the working window faster. And Red Bull takes a little bit longer, but because of the track layout, surface, whatever you want to call it, it wasn't as important. Obviously, Max got that immediate pass done in the beginning of the race, which really set him up to take on. And then once he had his tires in the working window, he was able to use that power to get past Charles. But I think Ferrari just chews through its tires, and we saw it in Imola too. They just chew through their tires faster because they get them warmer faster, and Charles has a more like do or die attitude about racing, I guess you could say. Well, which we saw Max classically the last few years, right? It was, I'm either going to make this pass or I'm going to put you in the wall, kind of. And he seems a bit more relaxed this year, and Charles, having the weight of Ferrari being good again, is a little bit more do or die. So, but back to Nick's original point or question, I think for our Red Bull feels like they've taken another step in this next upcoming race in Barcelona, because that's a classic testing track, and they have, probably billions of data points, and they know that track so well. It's going to be really interesting to see not only the development updates that all the teams bring to that track, because it sounds like every single team is bringing updates, but where the pecking order is in Barcelona, because if Red Bull's in front again, I don't see them catching up or I don't see Ferrari catching up maybe until the summer break, if they even do.
So one of the things you mentioned, Max, kind of going back to what Rohit was saying about, I forget the quote, but being a young driver, but being an old man mentally, it's sort of, he definitely was the young whippersnapper heading into corner one. Like, there was no hesitation from him with Sainz on that on the start of the race, right? And Sainz basically backed off in order to not hit him. But like, that's also the interesting thing. Like, I don't think that we've seen, like, nobody else is as aggressive as Max is at the front of the races, right? Like, there's nobody. Charles is, but he is in different situations. You know what I mean? Like, he's always been either significantly in front, pretty comfortable, and like when he pushes it to that point, it's usually trying to get back, right? Trying to catch up or something where, I think, I forget which race it was, but we saw him spin. But it makes me wonder, like, if Max is really at this point where, the mental fortitude has gotten him through, the young mistakes as a driver. Look, he's arguably going to be one of the best drivers of all time. Like, it's probably pretty likely that we're going to have a conversation 10 years from now, and he's still going to be in the talk for the top, 2 or 3 drivers on the grid. But I think it's really interesting to kind of, to your point about the improvements. One of the other things that came up in the post-race interview, I forget who it was. I guess it was Mattia again with Will Buxton, basically saying that, Ferrari hasn't really done much to their cars, where all the other teams at the top have actually spent a lot of money. So budget constraints might come into play this season in a way that, no team has had to deal with that before, really, right? Like, they've had budgets, and then they just flow through them, and they're like, okay, cool, we had to spend more money to keep going because you wanted us to race, right? Like the Formula One, the FIA isn't going to be like, oh, Lewis and Mercedes spent all their money, so they're no longer racing the rest of the season. Like, even though, like, I know the budget is capped way lower this year and it's very much like a talking point, I still think that it's interesting to that nobody's really talking about it yet, other than like Will Buxton bringing that up. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting because, to your point, I think, like, you know, that almost gives Charles and Carlos with Ferrari a little bit more reason to be more aggressive, right? Like, they can push it a little bit further and know that, like, okay, we're still going to get a better car or better improvements from this regardless, where, like, if you get to the point where this is as good as it is, that's got to be way heavy in somebody's mind. If they're, you know, let's say they're third or fourth, let's say they're Checo, right? Like, he's running third or fourth almost every race. And if he's thinking, if that ever comes into play, like, where, like, okay, how do I back up Max the way he has in the previous seasons and fight off the competition? Those types of things have to be in the drivers' heads, even if they wouldn't really probably admit it publicly. They have to think about this because they're, you know, so involved in the actual race in the car and everything, every aspect of this sport.
Yeah, the psychology of this is great because you had mentioned, Todd, and I think you also mentioned it, Nick, Max made kind of mincemeat of Carlos right off the start of the race. And I'm wondering, is that Carlos being a little cautious because of how the previous two races have ended for him? Because he lost his point streak. That's all people were talking about. This beacon of consistency was turning mortal right before our eyes. So I'm wondering, A, does that contribute anything? The other thing I will talk about is the fact that I think in a previous episode, I was very adamant in my view that I don't think Max is having the championship sequel that we would want. Dare I say, I thought there was a bit of a hangover there because of the fact he was looking uncomfortable. He looked like he was coming off second best in the mind games. Like we talked about the famous, no, you sit, and then I'll go ahead and just overtake you as soon as you overtake me match from Charles Leclerc. I do like your point around the fact that, hey, Ferrari is doing this with little to no modifications. Everybody's already gone to the hairdresser, so to speak, to get their new hair did. I do wonder, are we almost putting too much stock in this? Because now the question around Charles, especially from a Ferrari perspective, is he's always had whispers about the fact that he may not be necessarily ready. And I will say this, I'm turning a new leaf in regards to how Max handled this race. Yeah, it was boring to watch as a viewer, but that was a professionally won race by Max. He is a bit like the Hulk where he's always angry. So he's ready to do that move and be aggressive. But now the thing is the situational awareness that previously eluded him is there in full spades. And that's what's scary about it because he is Mr. All or Nothing at this point. I am really worried about the fact that I don't think Charles has got the mental fortitude. So, I mean, I will be the guy that's calling into question around each guy's temperament. But you brought up that point that I hadn't even thought of. And I'm now wondering, does Ferrari have Red Bull right where they want? Or is this just too much momentum that Red Bull's accumulated over the last couple of races where it doesn't matter if Ferrari thinks they have them because ultimately Red Bull is going to be its biggest competitor, like the way most dynasties are?
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought that up, Nick. The development talks that we haven't really talked about. Ferrari hasn't done anything to their car. Red Bull has brought two somewhat small upgrade packages to their car so far. Back to Rohit's question, I don't think that we're at that stage yet, you know, being 5 races in. It's not like they've blown through $130 million of their $145 million budget yet. So they're both going to continue to develop. And that's why I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in Spain, because if they both bring upgrade packages to Spain, and this is a good track for the testing and seeing how these developments work out, if Red Bull is still, I don't know, 4 or 5 tenths a lap faster than Ferrari at this point, like they have been. I don't know if it's been 4 or 5 tenths, but it's been at least 3 tenths a lap. Then it's going to start to feel that way for sure. That like it's kind of a little Thanos-ish. I am inevitable. You're going to be fighting me no matter what. Unless we see Mercedes, like we're all expecting, and we've kind of alluded to on this podcast already, that they just come out of nowhere with some big triangular shaped car that we haven't even thought of, and they've been sandbagging this entire time, and all of a sudden they're in the fight for the constructors because it's Mercedes and that's what we expect from German precision or whatever. But if Ferrari doesn't, which they said they are bringing developments to Spain, if they don't take a significant step forward and Red Bull kind of, or Max I guess specifically, runs away with this race, it's going to start to feel like, all right, maybe it is going to just be that domination type of formula that we don't want to see because we just went through
a decade of it.
Yeah, almost a decade of it.
No, I was just going to say we had 4 years of Red Bull, and after that was the near decade of Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes winning. By the way, I was curious. I looked up the historical results of the Spanish Grand Prix. Who has won the last 5 Spanish Grand Prix?
Mercedes
and Lewis Hamilton. From 2017 till 2021, it has been a Lewis Hamilton won race. So, I mean, if ever there is a fertile ground for narrative, it might be in Barcelona during the Spanish Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting race to just see how the teams come out, right? Like Todd said, it's the perfect track for a lot of things, in my opinion.
Except for racing.
Yeah.
Because it's terrible racing.
Well, so I want to talk a little bit about the AlphaTauri Red Bull relationship. But before we get into that, let's talk about Miami. Let's talk about the track itself, because we've alluded to it, but we didn't really get into it. And watching the race was, I mean, damn near boring for a lot of the race for me. And I didn't realize until tonight when you pointed out that Aaron had posted in the Discord the
46
overtakes. Yeah, 54 overtakes and only 26 of them were shown on the live broadcast. So to me, that's the missing piece, right? Like you're not showing the best parts of the race if you're not showing the overtakes and the competitiveness. Granted, a lot of those could potentially be back and forth type of things and, you know, switch through, kind of like what we saw with Max and Charles through the first few races. But like, that's also entertaining. So why not show that? Like I saw somebody on Twitter at some point throughout the race that was like, wait, it's been 5 minutes since Christian Horner was talking on camera, so we should put him back on camera. And like, that's sometimes how I feel about it. Granted, like that's also been the case with like Toto and, you know, Zach Brown, like literally every person that's, you know, throughout the last 10 years, that's somewhat interesting. They tend to like go right back to them. But Christian Horner has become that person because he's spicy. He's always a little bit more prodding with his words on camera compared to most of the other principals, you know, and team. Team
you can say he's charismatic. Like that dude is essentially auditioning for life after principling, if you will, because he is going to be the best pundit Formula One ever has because of the fact, to Nick's point, he has a way with words. He has a loathsome or lovable personality, depending on what side of the coin you flip. And people are going to naturally gravitate towards his bitchiness. And that's the best way to describe it, because he truly is the player hater of the year for the last decade. So if Lewis was that dominant on the track as a race car driver, Mr. Horner is that dominant of being a malcontent, if you will, or a rabble rouser or a shit stirrer.
So my question then is it because of the broadcast?
Yes.
That this race felt bad? Or is it because we saw too much of Dan Marino's fucking statue in front of all of the podium ceremony? No. I mean, sorry, that's a little harsh. I love Dan Marino. Not. I actually am a fan. But like it seemed so overblown American to me. And I was just like, no wonder nobody likes Americans.
I joke about this a lot, so apologies if I sound like a broken record. This was America as Steve Buscemi as the hello, fellow Formula One fans. Aren't we all cool? Like,
yes,
this is how it felt.
So there's two things here. One, the TV direction, which I've been on a rant about. I've already talked about this.
ISO.
Whoever is running that TV direction, and I know it's got to be so hard to predict 20 cars on track and who's going to overtake who and who's, battling or whatever. But like, there was a time there where they showed probably 5 laps of the DRS train. Damn well no one's getting out of that DRS train. It's a bunch of midfield cars, not particularly competitive. Like the 2 Astons were intermixed, I think, with the 2 Haas's and Merc, I think it was.
Merc, maybe I think an Alpine might have been in there as well at some point.
Whatever. But like, you know that DRS train is going to keep chugging along because that's just where those cars are in the pecking order. And then it'll cut to David Beckham in the McLaren garage, probably high as a kite because he had no idea what was going on. And then it'll cut to fans, and then it'll cut to Dan Marino. And then, as you said, like, we haven't heard, there's nothing going on in this race, so let's go to Christian Horner on the pit wall again. And I like that they mix up the team principals, like it rotates a new team principal every race to give some color there. But I've been a little let down by Christian this season because he doesn't have his raging hard on for Toto because they're not battling this season. So he's just like, oh, yeah, it's interesting. Ferrari's doing pretty good. We had a little problem with Checo, and he's down on 20 kilowatts on power. So we're gonna figure it out. It's been kind of boring. Like, it's not even spicy on the pit wall this season. But the TV direction is absolute shit. Second point I'll make: everything about the spectacle that they tried to present, like, this is Miami, and they should have just had Will Smith. If he didn't just slap Chris Rock, it probably would have been there. It was so America, like, fuck yeah, like Team America kind of felt from a spectacle standpoint that it was a bit too much. Like the paddock, did you watch the pre-race? There was like 4,000 people on the grid starting, and it's like, I didn't get to watch the Sky Sports coverage because they hate America and I can't get access to it. But like, Brundle was literally having a hard time walking around in the sea of people that were there.
That only happens in America, by the way, because last year at Austin, wasn't it the whole Meg Thee Stallion debacle where he was trying to shoot his shot in a journalistic sense?
Yeah. I love Martin Brundle for that. I can because I just did. Was probably the best line all season. But everything about the spectacle was bad. The track is okay. And I say okay in the sense that they need to get rid of the Mickey Mouse chicane at turn 14, 15, 16. They need to do something about that part, speed it up, smooth it out, whatever. And then for the love of God, fix the track surface, because I feel like it could be a really good track, kind of Baku-esque, if the cars could go offline to overtake. And this is my one shout out to Danny Rick on the podcast. The one good overtake of the entire race to me was his overtake of Tsunoda. He was, I think even Crofty or Brundle called him out, and he was like, oh, there's last of the late breakers, Ricardo again. And I was like, yeah, that was like, you just got 11th place. Good job, Danny Rick. But I don't even want to talk about him because he's a mess right now. But the track has potential if they can lay down a new asphalt or something, or improve, hold a bunch more races there and get it rubbered in, something like that. It always rains in Miami, so it's always going to be a challenge, but they need to do something to the actual track surface, because you saw at the very end of the race, Bottas lose 2 places because he was, I guess he said he was looking in his mirrors too much, watching the Mercs behind him fight, and went offline a tiny little bit. And that pulled him offline so bad that he lost 2 places because of it. So fix the damn track surface, fix the TV direction.
That further lets me know that Terry Bottas is the greatest teammate Mercedes ever had. Because even when he's not on the team, he's really looking forward to putting Lewis in a higher pedestal. The other thing I will say is the Martin Brundle cheap shot, if you will, because I thought that was a very Horner-esque bit of dialogue where he's like, what did he used to say? Lick it? Lick the stamp? What was it? I was like, okay, the man's fallen quite a bit, Martin. Like, we don't need to go this level where we've forgotten the man's catchphrase. That man is the reason why you're here in Miami, essentially, because he's the one that we as a American audience gravitated towards when Drive to Survive happened. So let's pump the brakes a little, to borrow the bad pun that is.
I mean, not to pick on Martin Brundle, but he did. He
confused Paolo Ben Stroll.
Yeah, Paolo with Patrick Mahomes. What?
He also, actually, I think it was Crofty, but this is back to the broadcast. He would not get it into his head which car was which in the Astons. He confused Vettel and Stroll for like 10 minutes and then tripled down on it.
That was like, so crazy.
And he's known for like flubbing that from time to time. Like everybody kind of jokes about how Crofty gets the cars wrong from time to time. But like, I think somebody corrected him and he still kept going. Like, come on, there's 20 cars. It's literally your job to know them.
Not only that, use your inference. Use your context clues. When has Lance Stroll ever been the better driver out of those two cars?
Well, this weekend he was.
He did finish. Yeah. I mean, so I like the track a lot. I didn't like the spectacle. Like, it's overkill. For some reason, you know, maybe it's the new factor has worn off for Austin, but like Austin doesn't feel, you know, as over the top spectacle. Although I say this knowing that Danny Rick was doing donuts in, you know, an old NASCAR, and Shaq came in a Cadillac with Longhorn, you know, across the front, and I don't know. Like, I thought the race was like, it was frustrating because we didn't see all that middle of the pack action throughout the race. Like, you know, there's a lot of stuff happening and you're watching it and you're seeing the, you know, you see the drivers moving up and down on the side of the screen. So I'm just thinking, like, how are the announcers ignoring some of these things? And one, like, I understand that, like, you can't possibly have, I mean, maybe they do, but you can't possibly have a camera on everything at all times, right? But if you're going to, it's going to be with Formula One, right? Like, there's 3,000 cameras on average at courses right now, something like that. It's like, it's something ridiculous. But it was just one of those things where the race itself, I think, to your point, Todd, if the track is, you know, I kind of just go to like a little bit safer, right? Like, there needs to be room for air that's not going to take someone out of the competition completely, right? Not to say that, you know, we should be like babysitting these guys. They're all professionals and they all are great at what they do. But the, like, kind of to your point, like the line of cars, the train of cars that you're just like, okay, well, this is not entertaining at all. And yet on the other side of the track, people are passing each other, or at least fighting for corners and stuff. So one of the suggestions that I heard was, like, I guess, like, moving the DRS zones up, or the not the zones themselves, the
activation points.
The activation point. Thank you. Which I think is an interesting solution to some of the, like, lack of interestingness that happened at the front of the pack. And then, like, I like that little chicane corner, other than that goes under the freeway on-ramp or whatever that is, other than the fact that it looked like it was, you know, Rocky Mountains, you know, off-roading for every person that went through that corner. But, like, I like the idea of having something like that that's just like little technical, little bit of a curveball thrown at you. You know, it's there, but it still could really, you could really lose, you know, kind of control or place or whatever in something like that if you're not paying 100% attention. Kind of like to what you said about Bottas, right? Like, this is on a different corner completely, but, like, I feel like those types of little chicanes just leave just enough like room for error for these guys. My opinion.
I will say this. I usually think this way when it comes to TV shows. You can't judge a TV show by the first season because they're essentially still trying to figure it out. So under that context, maybe we don't judge this racetrack until year 3 or year 4, because by then they should get rid of the surfacing issues that Todd called out. By then they figure out what to do with the chicane. By then they have a better understanding of who to watch during this race, because say what you will about all the other races, there's a history associated with them. So they've got a bigger sample size of knowing what to watch at a Spa or at a Monaco. We don't have that yet with Miami, and maybe that's why we're angry about it.
No, it's not that, though.
Okay.
I don't think it... Well, to me, it's not. You could be right, and I see like how you're saying, like, we've never experienced, or they, even the TV broadcast people, haven't experienced a race around there, so they don't necessarily know what corners are going to be exciting and most of the action. But you can kind of tell just by how racing works. Like if there's a long straight and a DRS zone and then a tight corner, that's probably going to be an overtaking point.
Right.
But I didn't just start talking about the bad coverage on the F1 TV direction. It's been historically bad. I think it's somehow gotten worse since last year. Like the beginning of last year felt okay, and then maybe around the summer break last year, and then on it got really bad. And I don't think it's ever been good, but it's weird because the one good channel, or whatever you want to call it, on F1 TV that they had, called the Pit Lane channel, which had split screen at all times. So it was like one screen of any pit lane action was going on, one screen for the battle for the lead, and then whatever midfield battles that were interesting or close, whatever. And that was amazing because it was always something interesting happen. And why they won't do that kind of setup on the main broadcast, at least at some times, drives me insane. I don't know why they won't do it. But I disagree with Nick on the chicane thing. I get what you're saying. Like, it leaves so little room for error. And I agree also with Rohit, they need to do some things to improve, or can't remember which one of you said that, improve the safety. Because the crash, Nick, the crashes in free practice, Sainz, kind of barely lost it right before the chicane and slammed that wall. And that was his day done. And then Ocon also felt like such a slow crash, or like not that extreme of a crash, and it was like apparently 51G impact that like cracked his chassis.
Wow.
So they definitely need to do something to improve safety, at least in certain spots of that track. But the chicane, I think what ruins it for me is it was tight chicane and then into an even tighter entry to that straight that was right under the freeway underpass that you were talking about, which it was so awkward, and there's elevation change there that it was just like fumbly.
Yeah. No, it's basically the exhibit meme of, hey dog, I hear you like chicane, so here's a chicane on top of another chicane.
It's a little bit like that, right? Because like we talked about, we're going to Barcelona next, and everyone hates the chicane at the end of the lap because it screws up the overtaking. And to me, that chicane piece in Miami does the same thing, because if they just rounded that turn out and made it one hard turn going into the entry to that straight, not only does it present an overtaking opportunity there, it speeds up the cars for the end of that straight for another overtaking opportunity at the end of that before the final hairpin.
Formula One is a complicated sport, but Todd just helped us understand it a little bit better. So thank you for that, Todd.
Exactly. All right, so before we go into the fantasy stuff, let's talk about Pierre Gasly. Let's talk about Red Bull. Let's talk about AlphaTauri, because I can't fathom how AlphaTauri is so far off with Red Bull seemingly leaps and bounds above everybody else. And I just realized too, like, I don't know why I didn't realize this prior, Yuki Tsunoda is like ahead of Pierre Gasly in the points.
By 1 point, if I remember correctly.
I think he's up by 4 now.
Sacre bleu. Come on, Pierre. So the reason we're talking about this was during the Lost episode that some of you, if not all of you, will never get to hear because, internet's going to internet. We were just kind of lamenting the fact that what is the realistic expectation for AlphaTauri? Because as we all know, the reason why they are as prevalent as they are is Red Bull had an athletic apparel range that they needed to commemorate. So that's why we have a secondary team, which is essentially serving as that infomercial for that. But then as we will kind of talk about, what do we expect from AlphaTauri in terms of their positioning, not only in the constructors, but also what would we imagine their top driver to be? Because I think Pierre Gasly has skewed that a little bit because of how prolific he's been. Because I would swear that the last 2 years, his full name is Pierre Gasly is a top 6 driver, or the best driver outside the top 6.
It's a really interesting question, and I hadn't even thought about this until Nick, you brought it up last night, because we just kind of tore into Yuki on a previous episode, and I'm still convinced. I know he had a decent race. Well, actually, I wouldn't say he even had a decent race. He, again, got a little... Yeah. He burnt through his tires immediately, and then kind of got lucky in the shuffling, whatever. But yeah, it feels a bit weird because, as Rohit said, Mr. Top 6, Pierre Gasly, has been a pillar of consistency for AlphaTauri, and AlphaTauri has been the only... They actually have the only true team interrelationship in the sport, right? Like, we know that Ferrari has Alfa Romeo and Haas as their kind of like
sister team.
Well, they're customer teams, right?
Right.
So they run Ferrari parts, engine, etc. But AlphaTauri being is an actual true sister team. Well, it's junior team, whatever. They just rebranded it to sister team so they didn't feel like they were always the redheaded stepchild. And they had a really good year, and it felt like a team on the up with Pierre Gasly's win in Monza. What was that, 2 years ago? And then went on to continue to be Mr. Consistency after getting the boot from Red Bull, the proper daddy team. But he's not having a good year, and I hadn't even thought about that until Nick brought it up yesterday. But I don't know what the answer is, and I could, if this continues, could see both of them losing seats at the end of the season.
Are you willing to go hot take on that? Because that might be the spiciest take we've had in the history of this show.
No, because I think Pierre is a very, very good driver, and I think they will turn it around if the team can give him a car to compete with, because right now the car is just not only unreliable but also kind of dog shit.
Which, how does that happen?
A completely new rule book, right? Like, that's the only explanation.
But like with this, like, I mean, with Red Bull being so dominant, I just have such a hard time understanding how it doesn't
Nick, you
translate.
just answered your own question in a way. Red Bull is dominant. That's A1. Like, that has to happen. Let's say we get a scenario where last lap, first place Max, second place Gasly. Do you think Gasly is going to get racing orders? Or do you think he's just going to be deployed as a defensive wall to prevent whoever's in third place in that hypothetical scenario from overtaking Max? Like, it is the gift and the curse of being that team, that sister team. And that's why I also wonder, what is Pierre Gasly's endgame? Because, yes, he's a loyal person. He's loyal to the infrastructure. I mean, we talked about this a little bit with Albon as well, where for all of the faults that both of those drivers had with Red Bull, they continued to stay loyal to that infrastructure and that team because maybe they're the ones that got their first opportunity, but they should be a little bit more selfish. To me, if I'm Pierre Gasly, I've got to look at life post Red Bull. I think he would do wonders as the eventual Fernando Alonso replacement or even the Seb replacement, because Seb hasn't had a good year. And I'm wondering, is he prone to retire based on how dog shit his year has been, primarily because of that car?
I mean, I guess I'm asking more in like the just like the pure performance aspect of the cars, right? Like, to Todd's point, AlphaTauri cars seem to be pretty trash this year compared to the last couple of years. With Red Bull's dominance this year, like already out of the gates, being what seems like so far advanced beyond any of the other teams, I just don't understand how that doesn't translate to at least something consistent with the other team.
But they're not
like
allowed.
You said, it's.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That they're not allowed to share other than prescriptive parts, or that's not prescriptive parts are the ones that all the teams have to use. What's the damn term for it? Noted parts. I can't remember the term for it now, but there's a specific list of parts that a manufacturer or manufacturer in this case can share with the other teams. Like Haas is, or McLaren is running Mercedes power unit, gearbox, and I think rear suspension. Maybe not the last one, but something like that. But
that's my point, right? Like the Ferraris are all doing pretty consistently better than this year.
Yep.
But it's Ferrari. It's not like they're sharing secrets. It's just you got Ferrari power plants and drivetrains, right? So like, how does that not exist for the Red Bull team, which has been Honda and still is basically Honda underneath? It just doesn't make any sense to me, because it seems even different to me. And I don't know the specific rules like around that, but like, it seems even different that it is called like a sister team as opposed to, a customer team, right? Like the way, Haas is a customer of Ferrari or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's why I feel like there's just such a discrepancy between those two teams that it's just like, what the fuck is going on?
It really does feel weird. You're totally right that they fell off so hard, but it literally has to come down to their concept or their development of this new car under this new regulation, because they are not as easy on the tires like the Red Bull is, as you can see with Yuki burning through his tires every race, and maybe that's partially the driver, or probably mostly the driver, but they're not as good on the tires. Their top speed, based on, I'm guessing, aerodynamic concept, isn't as high as the Red Bulls. It's up there, but it's not as high, even with the Honda power unit in that car. So they're just having a harder time with the rule book, and they started off on the wrong foot, and now they're trying to play catch up. And I don't know if they will. They can, share certain things between the teams, as we've talked about, being a sister team, but they can't be like, hey, just copy our car. It's not like a pink Mercedes Force India situation where they're running last year's car or anything, because they can't.
Right. And to your earlier question, Todd, I think I found the term you were looking for: open source components, which are components whose design and intellectual property is made available to all teams. That awkward silence tells me we need to just...
Well, it's time then. We can talk a little fantasy and put AlphaTauri to bed.
Let's do it. I
feel like we were a little more on fire about that last night. So,
yeah, but
thanks,
I think
thanks, Internet.
The conversation also shifted, because last night I felt it was more Pierre Gasly focused. And apologies to the listener, you guys aren't going to hear those pearls of wisdom that the three of us came up with. But this was more around the actual team itself. And to Nick's point, like, why am I not seeing column B react the same way to column A? Because the thought is they should be covered under the same terminology.
Yeah, and I think the question is still Pierre Gasly, right? Like, we talked about Yuki previous episode, mainly because we're all fans of both these guys. It seems like, they might not be our favorite drivers on the grid, but like, they are definitely two of the most enjoyable, people out there. And I think that's the hard part of like not understanding where they land after this. And, probably in our next episode or within the next couple of episodes, we'll talk about Audi and Porsche coming back into Formula One. There's going to be more teams in Formula One, whether we want it or not. And I think that is going to be interesting for guys like Pierre, who have shown, glimpses of greatness, but for whatever reason, it's just not happening right now. And I think that's that's kind of the most interesting question around this season so far is like, how much of this is like the new cars being to blame, and how much of this is the drivers not being able to adapt to the new cars? Because I feel like those two things are happening simultaneously for a lot of drivers right now.
Yeah. It is a grid of haves and have-nots in a way that we haven't seen before, because it literally feels like half the grid can figure this new drivers out and the other half aren't. I guess one last question on this topic, because we do love to beat a good dead horse to the ground. Pierre Gasly's contract ends in 2023. Does he extend?
I think that the conversation so far has been, is he willing to leave Red Bull? Would he really go back to a team that gave him the boot the first time? If I'm Pierre Gasly, I'm not going to. I'm trying to showcase my talents as well as I can in the car for the time being, so I can get a drive with maybe a Ferrari-based team or a Mercedes-based team at this point, because there really isn't anywhere else to go. The ideal situation, right? Think 2023, Alonso's finally 107, and he's like, okay, I guess I'm going to stop racing. And he goes to Alpine, and they have a double French lineup. Like, that would be amazing. But I just checked the stats on his race results. So he was running in the top 10 in Bahrain until he blew up. So he would have had a points finish there. He then had an 8th. He then had a 9th and a 12th. And then this weekend also had a DNF. So he is performing, I guess, better than it feels like he is. But again, I think that's down to, it could be what Rohit just said, or Nick just said, I mean. Are they figuring out, like, is the driver not adapting to the car, or is the car just that dog shit? I would lean towards, in AlphaTauri's case, that it's a bad car. I feel like he's young enough to adapt well, but only time's going to tell on this.
I think that's the interesting thing about Pierre, though, is like when you look at the race positions for the season, Yuki's driven better than him. Like,
but again,
that's wild to me.
He blew up right in Bahrain, and that gave Yuki a points finish because of that. Otherwise, Yuki would be outside the points. So there's a 4-point swing. I know it's like,
yeah.
At the same time, it's very small and a very big difference in Formula One, because 10th is worth 1 point. So if you have, 4 more 10th place finishes, like, that's a big result as opposed to your teammate. But Pierre Gasly might get a 6 and Yuki DNFs again, and then it's a 10-point swing the other way, right?
Yeah, and points wise, I'm not looking at the points necessarily. I'm just like, look, you pull it up and it's like, okay, Yuki has a 7th, 8th, and 12th, and a 15th with 1 DNS. Pierre is at 8th, 9th, and 12th with 2 DNFs. And like, yeah, the DNFs are obviously the car's fault both times, right? Like, I don't think, it was a car issue, right?
Oh, no, I still don't believe it.
Yeah.
He said that, I know he was having like a steering issue or whatever right before that wreck with Lando, and I guess you can argue Lando should have given him a little bit more space, but to Lando's defense, like, if your car's retiring, then get the hell off the racing line. Like, I shouldn't have to go around you.
Yeah.
But that was his fault. Kind of. I mean, at least on some level. Like, the car was moving, so it was kind of driving. So just turn the steering wheel a little bit to the right.
Yep, I agree. All right. Let's cut it off. Let's talk fantasy.
All right, let's do this. We'll start with the Actually, we're going to start with the league, Voldemort League that shall not be named, which I just learned something new tonight. That this league has a very interesting aspect to it. That once you've used a driver for 5 races, they're done for the season. So, like, I had a pretty solid lineup, and I wasn't leading the league. But I tried to re-sign Charles, right? Because he was, like, cheap enough, I think, at the beginning of the season at least. He wasn't cheap. No, he wasn't. Sorry, that's wrong. That's the F1 league. But I tried to re-sign Charles, and it was locked. And I'm like, that's really interesting. And then I tried to sign Max again, and it was locked. And then I noticed that all 5 of the drivers that I had previously had for the last 5 races were locked. So once you use them for 5 races, they're gone forever.
Did you just monster drive in your first week in this league?
I guess so. I don't really know because I'm not winning. So I didn't, do what Nick's brothers did and just try to be in first for the first week. But yeah, I had to sign a very interesting lineup for that league. But the standings for that league are Trav still in first. AA Ron is still in second, and I am in third place, apparently.
Hey.
So,
am I giving Nick competition in last place?
I was going to say, I haven't logged into that league in like 3 weeks. So.
If you signed all drivers for 5 races, then at least you had drivers for all of the races so far. I'm going to have to make sure I check this because of this newfound strategy. I only signed my next lineup of drivers for 3 races because I was like, well, maybe I'm going to want to save, Lando for a later race or something. So, that's a fantasy update for the Voldemort League. Moving on to the F1 official Discord Fantasy League, which is now reloading. I believe our quiet yet lurking friend Nicholas C. Vertappen Dad Ass is still in front for the season, followed up by Aaron again, all Haas, no brakes. And in third place, our Canadian friend Iron Trevor D. For the week, let's check the results for Miami. And Nicholas C had tops the week with 249 points. Your brother, Alpha Ash Ari, was in second with
Monster Drive.
AKA Monster Drive, 247 points. And again, Aaron, strong week with 245 points in third. Just to make sure that we're not going to miss out on the hosts. For the league, Rohit, you are in 6th place, right behind me in 5th.
Hey.
And Nick, you are in 10th. The speeding burritos starting to get a little bubble guts there. Starting to go the wrong direction.
By the way, $1 billion idea. If any of our listeners are inspired to start their own Haas-centric podcast, here's your name. Haas Holes.
I would go with all aboard the Steiner ship, but that's just... I mean, I know that... I didn't make that up. That came out of the memes from the Drive to Survive show, but damn, the Steiner ship is full speed right now. All right, and last but not least, we have the Exhaust Notes Podcast Fantasy Draft League. We had a pretty close week. Well, finally, some good news. Aaron isn't, dominating one league. So we'll start with him in last place with a total of 38 points, followed by myself in third with a total of 49 points, Nick with a respectable 53 points, and Rohizi takes the top spot with 55 points. So season totals on that. We have Nick in last place with 244.
Not so fast.
1 point ahead, we have Rohit with 245. I came in. I'm in second place currently with 250 points even, and then Aaron on top with 252. So, if he wins all 3 leagues, he's never invited back to the podcast.
No, Trav's going to shut him down.
I really hope. Where is Trav? He's Mr. Fantasy Domination.
I was going to say, Trav is the Verstappen to Aaron's Lewis Hamilton, and I think that's apropos because I'm pretty sure Lewis Hamilton is Aaron's favorite driver, and you don't have to ask Aaron about that. He told me that, so yeah.
So I was thinking we need to get Aaron on for potentially the next episode with around the conversation around Porsche and Audi.
Yeah, I was going to say this. Are we a quarter of the way through the season? Because I think we should do also an awards season of like, okay, biggest disappointment of the quarter or best driver, most unexpected.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
That would be cool. I also thought about having him on this week, actually, because we almost watched the race together because we both had to watch it late. So we were texting that day. And somehow neither of us got it spoiled for ourselves. So shout out to self-control. But going back to my original question, good old Travi P is in 8th place in the Discord Fantasy League. So you need to get it together. And he's already used his Joker card to change his entire team. So
I'm convinced he's letting somebody else use his fantasy league because the Travis I know would never do such a faux pas in fantasy. So.
Yeah, he needs to get it together. So I'll finish it up with this because I just thought of this and I wanted to ask it earlier. Who was your driver of the weekend for the Miami GP?
Oh, obviously Dan Marino.
Please never give out football helmets again. Carlos Sainz
awkward.
Carlos Sainz doing the salute in his helmet looked like a 12-year-old has found his dad's football helmet and was putting it on.
It reminded me of the old Mike Myers character from Saturday Night Live. Was it Philip, the kid who like you fed him chocolate and he was super strong because he was so amped up? Because he just looks so out of place with that. My driver of the week is my dear friend Esteban Ocon because 20th at the start of the race, all the way to 8th. And granted, that was also assisted by Fernando Alonso being Fernando Alonso. But I think it's something to be said that he's one of those drivers that we've characterized as the haves in terms of I think he's figured this car out a bit faster than some of the Parisian peers that he's often been compared to in Pierre Gasly.
I have one more non-driver of the week. My whatever you call it. I forget what site it was, which is good because I can't call them out specifically. But one of the sites quoted Helmut Marko as saying that that Checo lost 4 seconds, was losing 4 seconds per lap during the race, during that little slip up, whatever issue he was having. And I was thinking wait, why are you quoting Helmut Marko when we all listen to him say that over the radio? He literally says, I'm losing 4 seconds a lap. And they're crediting Helmut Marko what?
No, I think the actual context was so Sergio came over the radio and said, engine power's down, or whatever. And his race engineer just said, oh, no, you lost the tow. Everything's cool because nothing was coming up for them on their computers or whatever. And he's like, what do you mean I just lost a tow? I just lost 3 seconds on the straight, I think is what he said.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
And then Helmut Marko came out and said he was losing 4 seconds a lap to the power difference. But Helmut Marko, I'm so sick of that evil villain looking asshole. He's just kind of casually racist and literally just shits on everyone and said Lando's the only talented driver on the grid besides Max.
Yeah, that's a hot take.
They're all talented, right? To some degree. They got money or not. They're driving a car 200 miles an hour and not killing themselves. There's some talent there.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you talking about the doctor?
Yeah, the good Dr. Evil.
No, I was going to say, Formula One has a bit of Game of Thrones about it, where there's about 5 or 6 different villains that are there simultaneously, and there's a clear hierarchy. And as much as we like to give Lawrence Stroll's dad the top villain spot, really it's Helmut Marko, and it's not even close. He's got Verstappen-like speed when it comes to just sheer douchebaggery.
What the hell was the main evil guy's name in Game of Thrones? The Ice King?
The White Walker?
There was Night King. The Night King.
Night King, yeah.
Helmut Marko is now forever the Night King.
Yeah.
Because he looks just as
old I was thinking a little more
withered.
Tywin Lannister, but yeah, I don't think Helmut Marko ages. I think he's cryogenically frozen every night.
He definitely is on life support for sure. Anyway, so sorry, Nick, your driver of the weekend was...
You know, that's a tough question. Probably George. Because he had to fight past Lewis. Yeah, like, I was surprised. Had a terrible qualifying, right? Like, I just wasn't expecting him to be anywhere near what he finished, 6th. I thought he'd be 10, 11, 12 based on qualifying. So
interesting. Yeah, I think he had a good drive, but I think he really benefited from that safety car.
I think that's what makes it really tough to even call a driver of the day, right? Because, like, of course, Max drove and won. Like, obviously, he did a great job. Charles was right there with him. Carlos was right there with them. You know, if Checo, I mean, who's to say that Checo, like, even with the engine issues, I think Red Bull's still probably a better car than the rest of the cars on the grid. So I don't know. Is it really that? It's not really a driver of the day if your car is going to put you there naturally.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But it's an interesting question. Like, George did have a good race. Granted, he benefited, but he was able to put the car where it needed to be to have the opportunity to benefit, right? So you can argue that for anybody. I'm gonna have to agree and say Ocon. I wanted to say good old Terry Bottas, but that little look in the rearview mirror that pulled him offline really spoiled his race. But damn, is he having a hell of a season. And his just smug smile all the time in every interview when they're all just saying, like, oh, you're having such a good time at this team and you must be so thankful you're not a Mercedes, and his smug smile is so good.
You know what it reminds me of? It's the Luigi stare in Mario Kart, or whenever they figured out they would have different emotions in, I think, one of the next gen versions. Because, yeah, that dude is essentially the Luigi to Lewis's Mario.
Yep. Yeah. But in the end, I think Ocon, P18, all the way up the grid is pretty impressive. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting because Bottas, last comment, Bottas's little, slip up there is basically everything that, in my opinion, made him frustrating as a Mercedes, kind of a fan of Mercedes throughout the years, right? Because he could run with Lewis 55 out of 57 laps and he would make one little mistake. And, like, that's really the difference between, like, being midfield and being great, like one of the greatest of all time, right? Like, it's like Max is not making any mistakes right now. He's in that position that Lewis has been in for the past 8 years. Lewis is still making some mistakes, regardless of how shitty the car is. There's been some times where you're like, what? Lewis? Is that you? But anyway, all right, we've been going for a long time, so let's wrap. Guys, let them know how they can find you on all the social media sites.
Instagram, RoadM13. Twitter, Roheezy. Now I pass it to my rhyming partner.
T-Yeezy on Instagram, TYeezyF1 on Twitter, and most importantly, you can follow us at exhaustnuts.fm and on all major podcast platforms.
Definitely. You can follow me at Nick Engvall on all the platforms. Hit the first link in the description to join us in the Discord. We can have a lot more conversation. There's a pretty good conversation this weekend around the race. We did not live stream, but we will get back to that in the future. But the conversation in the Discord was worth tuning in for as you're watching the race or throughout the race weekend. Thanks, y'all, for supporting us. We appreciate you. We'll catch you on the next one. Leave us a review if you haven't. We would definitely appreciate it. Catch you next time.
Where are the
Peace.
napkins?
Pierre Gasly to Alfa Romeo, speaking it into existence.